Hi, welcome to episode 43 of the American Tributaries podcast, where to break out of the bubbles we all live in, we're using modern technology to explore the various currents of people in our great country, kind of like a 21st century Lewis and Clark journey. I'm your host, Michael Whiddon, here in Brooklyn, New York, and thank you for joining me in this exploration of America. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Michael Drewry, who lives in southeastern Virginia between Richmond and Norfolk in the vicinity of Jamestown. Michael and I got to know each other through a program called One Small Step, organized by StoryCorps, and they're looking to start conversations between Americans to help us recognize our common humanity and, despite any disagreements we might have. So Michael and I thought I had a great conversation, and I asked Michael if he'd be interested in continuing the conversation on the podcast, and I was thrilled when he said yes. So, Michael, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you doing, and could you share a bit of your story?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. We got two Michaels here, so a Mikey D and Mikey W, I guess. But well, thanks for having me, and thanks for doing this podcast. I know you're trying to help society, and so am I. This accent is a southeastern Virginia. We call it a tidewater accent. How can I say it? We are so rural down here that we still keep some of the old English slang in our terminology. Quite frankly, I like accents, and so if anybody has any trouble understanding me, that's what it's about. We go to outs and abouts and all this kind of stuff. My wife's from Texas, and I constantly have to repeat things for her. So that's kind of my background on that. I was raised in southeastern Virginia in an agrarian area and locality that is gone now, basically, and in a small town type of atmosphere. My family, the Drewry side of the family, came into Jamestown in the 1600s and haven't gone too far away. On my grandfather's side, it was, it's been agriculture, farming, grist mills, and this type of thing. So I'm very steeped in that history. And when I was growing up, I wanted to kind of follow those footsteps to understand what they went through, in the past. So the historical past is important to me. I think it's where we learn and learn valuable lessons. So I went to college in ag at North Carolina State to begin with, and came back and actually purchased the farm where my father was raised on. It was going to be sold out of the family, and I didn't want to see that done. People that don't know southeastern Virginia economy, after the Civil War, Barnum and Bailey Circus needed peanuts, and the area where I live in, just 7 miles away, was where the first commercial peanut factory was invented, actually, and supplied those peanuts. And so from about 1880 all the way to the year 2000, it was a peanut economy, and helped our area. So the agricultural economy was fairly affluent as it comes to agriculture. And so Wakefield, I think, has got a sign that says the peanut capital of the world. Obuchi, I forget his first name, but he formed Planters Peanuts, which is not about 20 some miles away. So again, it was peanuts, and more peanuts. I can't remember the saying, but it was like something about you're peanut alive, and basically when you die, you're peanut dead, and everything was peanuts. The reason I bring that up is that, things change. I find, especially in the ag world, if economically, if you have a 100-year run, that's about it. And it was the same for the peanut economy. With the opening up of the borders, and not criticizing that because I believe in free trade, but it was devastating for the peanut industry. We had a flood of cheaper peanuts into the U.S. It used to be border protected, and the price of peanuts to the farmer went from 30 some cent a pound all the way down to 7 cents a pound in 1 year. It stopped the economy in southeastern Virginia where I lived. this is long-winded, but it kind of gives a little bit of my background. I was steeped in the family farm, and historically, my family was into family farming. And again, since the early 1900s, it was peanuts. I saw that coming after I got out of college. I was full-time farming and decided that in my lifetime, soon, that economy was going away. And so while farming, I went back to school. Now, as I sit here and say that, I don't know how I did it. William and Mary, I went to William and Mary in business school, and you have to be a full-time student there. They don't like part-time people for some reason. But a point of saying that, I was raising a family and not extolling it, farming and going to William and Mary full-time. And I think the only way I could do that was that most of the other students were going out and getting drunk at night, and I was just drunk from staying up all night with kids. But so it was on even keel. I did that, and was offered a position after I got out of school to go with a agricultural entity in the U.S. called Continental Grain Company, and they're a privately held company, but Continental, Cargill, and Orchard, it's ADM we call it, each handled about 30% of the agricultural exports that left the U.S. And so when that opportunity came up, with my ag background and my business background, I helped them start up a division in the 1990s, and it was a valuable experience for me. And I wanted to come back to my farm, and so what I did was I was farming this whole time too, unbelievably. But I had a good neighbor, a good employee, and a retired father that could help out, and a company that understood. From time to time, I was going to fly back to Virginia and plant peanuts. But I went back to school during this time also and got a law degree from William and Mary. And mainly, I'm not enamored with the law at all, but understood that I wanted to understand it better. From time to time in the corporate world, the corporate attorney would call me up and say, "Hey, seriously, this happened in Missouri. The attorney general today is deciding whether he's going to bring criminal charges against you about a permitting issue." I said, "Well, you know what? Thanks for letting me know, but I think I better learn a little bit more about this law and what a writ of mandamus is and blah, 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 and all these terms they were throwing at us." And so I came back and got my law degree and got into private practice, again, to sustain my farm, and eventually bled over into local government work because it gave me the flexibility, which is what I'm going to be doing here after this podcast. So I advise local governments on rules and regulations, mainly land use issues, and do some private practice work on conservation land use work as well. I have an office in my front yard on my farm, which perplexes most lawyers. Where's your office will be the answer. I mean, the question, and I'll say, well, it's in my front yard. And they, what do you mean in your front yard? Well, in my front yard, you know. So I have a farm with cattle, hogs. We have you pick blueberry operations. We have an inn on the farm, and I could go on and on. So I work about 3 days a week on law, and the rest of the time on the farm, and because it's what I enjoy, and it kind of gives me peace. So anyway, but the loss of the peanut economy in the area is what drove me back to school, and I'm glad it did. Sort of, the area economically is still trying to recover, as many areas, whether you're steel mills in Pittsburgh or just where. But we lost our economics in southeastern Virginia, and it has really not found its footing since. So that kind of gives you a little bit of a background of me. As I tell people, I'm a farmer that got a law degree, not a lawyer that got a farm. And there's a difference, if you understand. And
Yeah.
I do it, and glad I understand the law, but I do it to help sustain my farm. And one last thing I'll say, unbelievably, since I've owned this farm, I've had to use my legal degree to stop a new road coming through my farm, a railroad from coming through my farm, a major, largest coal plant on the East Coast being constructed next to my farm, and now I'm fighting a methane digester coming into the edge of my farm. My point of it is you can understand, it's like, wow, I'm glad I got that because without it, I don't know that I could have afforded to
Yeah. Wow.
legally defend. I do a lot of pro bono and work even for myself. So anyway, so that's long winded, but that kind of gives you a little bit of my history and who I am. And guy in southeastern Virginia, that's a little bit of an anomaly these days in rural America. Um, I am progressive, and which is different in the rural sectors these days.
hmm Wait, I guess like I'll go back first, and then we can definitely want to cover that too. But I guess you were able to see this problem and you've adapted. What is it? I mean, either about your neighbors or about the farming industry in general that has made it so difficult for so many of your neighbors to not be able to make the pivot. And I guess I say this like in a larger context, but like my perception of like farming is that this seems to kind of happen where just there from time to time like an industry changes and it's hard for regions to pivot. And is that just the nature of farming, or is there something like just like I don't know if it's dysfunctional is the right word, but is there something that needs to be fixed about farming to be able to make those quicker pivots?
It's two things: it's economics and it's cultural. The economic side of it is that farming is expensive to get into and the equipment. And if you've invested in peanut equipment, for instance, the combines, and I mean these tractors nowadays are costing $250,000, and some of them are very specialized. Harvesters, the same thing, and very specialized. So you don't. I mean, a farmer, most of them, unless you're huge, don't go out and write a check for these things. They borrow the money, and so you've got to go into when you invest like that. Of course, as you know, you've got to have a long term view at it to be able to pay this stuff back. And so when the economy twists on you, it's tough to be able to pivot to a new commodity. And we're pivoting now in southeastern Virginia. We won't be able to compete long term. Cotton is becoming a fairly commodity that's being raised in our area. And I say that southeastern Virginia was built on small fields and small peanut fields and even tobacco fields. And to pivot to a commodity such as cotton that is grown worldwide in Texas, down south, where there's center pivots and huge fields that you can't see the tree line at the end. You understand? It's very expensive to do that pivot, and a cotton picker now that's it's probably seriously $850 to $1 million for just one picker, and so it's very hard for a farmer to pivot economically. I think farmers, if they would have more open mind, could pivot to more small farming. I went to NC State, and NC State was made up of smaller farms and smaller fields. In other words, when I say small farming, a family farm could have 10 or 15 acres of tobacco that's very labor intensive and make a living on it. So they were used to small farming, I call it. Today, when I say farm, when you say farm, it's multiple things. One is your local food movement, your small farm, if you understand me, that's trying to raise produce and livestock for the local market. Number two is your medium-sized farms that you're going to have to work off farm to be able to do it. You just enjoy farming, you enjoy the freedom of it. And I'm talking with a guy that's working 300 acres or something like that, or 400 acres. In my day and time, coming and being raised in Southeast Virginia, that 300-acre farm was a family farm that could self-sustain itself and send its kids to college. It can't anymore.
Really?
Most farmers have to work off farm. Or somebody has to afford it, health insurance, the whole bit. And then you got what I'm going to say is the corporate farm that's working thousands of acres. If you buy a combine for $1 million, you've got to work a lot of acreage with it. And so even in my area, I'm seeing the guys that are doing it having to work 4,000 or 5,000 acres. And that's very, very difficult in the small field sector in Virginia. Not as difficult in the Midwest, if you understand me, where you might have a 1,000-acre field, So what I'm getting at, number one, economically, it's hard to pivot. It takes a takes a long time to make that economic turn. Number two is, and I haven't really reached on this, but I will now, is cultural. Most farmers are fairly conservative people and are not risk takers. And I understand that. I am more a risk taker than most and will try new ventures. And I'm not extolling that because it can get you in financial trouble, but I will try new things. That's a fairly small segment of your agricultural communities. Most farmers won't do that because of financial fear. And that comes from long time. You know, when my grandfather was farming in Virginia, he had no social programs to fall upon. And at the end of the year, if he couldn't pay the bank, he was foreclosed upon. Period. And so you can understand why the conservatism came in to not taking risk, and that has come down. My grandfather was born in 1903. Was farming in the 1920s, all the way up into the 70s. And so what I'm getting at, that's not that long ago. And he would have had a very conservative mindset. And that mindset is still with your rural communities. They don't like change. I once had I don't mind telling you, I'm a divorced guy that got remarried later in life, and thought I ought to get some counseling, and the counselor told me, he said, "Wow, you're different." I said, "Why?" And they said, "Because most males don't like change, and you do." I said, "Well, okay." So the reason I bring that up is that I'm a little bit more entrepreneurial than most farmers would be, and rightfully so. You understand? So I've always figured that if I failed at something, I could pick myself up and go at it again. But that is not the mindset of most rural people.
Well, I mean, you're talking to somebody who's changed careers. This is I'm on my fourth career now, so I guess I share your flexibility in that respect. But I mean, but I think I guess it's almost in some respect it's very natural to resist change. And when I sold wine for 12 years in my last career, and one of the things that I found it took me a little while to appreciate is that when you're selling wine, one of the things that people kind of look for now, like just kind of like almost like it could be like a black and white requirement, is that they want their wines to be organic, right? And they want to hear about the farmer farming organically, and it's easy to say that, but it's a lot harder to do that, because like if you're the farmer, and if you're like you're a grape farmer in France, and your family for generations has been raising grapes one way and it was not organic, and to change it is a big risk, because it's easy as a consumer in New York City to be like, well, I'm not going to buy that wine because that's not organic. Or why aren't they organic? Well, it's because when you change how you do things, there's a risk that it doesn't work out, and when it doesn't work out, there's still payments to be made, right? So I think that's something, it is universal, at least as far as I saw that, certainly in the wine business and with grape growers and stuff. So but do you so then I guess to me, but hearing you talk about that, I think that when we don't really talk about like politics per se in the in the podcast, but in terms of trying to understand people, I think that when you think then about like where I think to describe New York City is, I think New York is a place that's constantly kind of changing, and there's constantly like new things going on. And what I would say to somebody is, like, to understand it, you have to think about what it would be like to live in a concentrated area of 8 million people, right? To stand out, you got to do something different. So here there's a premium, and you're encouraged and you're incentivized to do different things. And that could be, even if it's superficial, or some people are superficial, some people are doing like real different things, but that could be business wise, it could be education wise, it could be socially. And at least my opinion on how we all need to kind of understand each other better is to understand that how you live in New York City, and maybe how you need to live in New York City, isn't necessarily going to work the same way. So if you're talking to a farmer about social trends and values in New York City, it might be fine in New York City in that moment. It might be easily understandable because in the ecosystem of New York City, being different and being cutting edge gets you press coverage, it gets you notoriety, it gets you noticed, it helps you stand out amongst 8 million people. But in a rural farming community where they're hesitant to even make changes that help them with their livelihood, having social trends that have almost no immediate impact on their life be something that they're told they should be doing, otherwise they're backwards, could come across as rather insulting. And I don't know if that's the case, but I guess I'm trying to throw out to you how I would perceive these national dialogues unfolding in an unhealthy manner if we're not aware of it. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I agree with your perspective. I'll add a little bit to it. Is that, and I had to, when I said I went work for Continental Grain and really enjoyed it, good company, ethical company, and privately owned. It was owned by a New York family, and so I had that divide. If you understand me, I was working in the rural sectors, and I had to explain to them the difference, if you understand. And one of the differences was they wanted me to buy. I won't get all into the detail of it, but they would want me to do something in the rural sector, and I was like, well, no, you got to understand, to get a real estate agent to come see me, they gave me a bunch of money and said, buy us some land. I'm going to have to go knock on the door of the real estate agent and get them out of the house. They're not going to come to me. And they were like, well, why? I said, because they don't believe you. In the rural sector, life is so tough that if you take risk or if there's change, there's often failure. And so you're taught, in some respects, to not be curious, to just do things traditionally because of a risk factor. And what I'm saying is that they all have people, they've seen so much failure that they don't believe something good is going to happen, if you can believe that. And so change can only lead, in their minds, to failure. So why take the time to change if there's just going to be a failure? It's just such difference. It's tough. And so here's what happens. And let me talk on the urban-rural divide a little bit, because it does hit, and this is not to be offensive to anyone, it's just a factual, is that I didn't realize this until, in fact, the later years. My wife and I talk about this often. She was raised in Houston and I wasn't, and so it gives us a different perspective to talk about. I thought common sense, and this is just me, I thought common sense was something that people were just born with. Now, with urban folks coming to my farm, I'm realizing it's a little bit more complicated than that. Common sense, I think, comes from getting a kid responsibility very, very early in life. And I mean really early in life. And it's not inconceivable at 4 and 5 years old for you to be doing work on a farm and driving a tractor. I was driving a tractor before I could reach the pedals, and the men would have to come and jump on the tractor and turn the tractor, and I could hold it straight. So I didn't realize what it was doing, but it was making your young mind solve things for yourself. They would send you to do a chore, and if something went wrong, there was no one around there to come fix it or help. You had to figure it out yourself. And even to this day, if something electrical, you can't just call up an electrician to come to my farm and fix it. You got to figure it out. Plumbing, anything else, sounds very simple stuff, but there's no one around to help. So you develop that sense of mechanically going through how to solve an issue, and to finish what you're doing, you might be 2 miles away from home and the tractor's broke down and you got to figure it out or walk home. So I think that's important. And so there's a divide, and there's a reason I'm saying this. So uneducated people in rural America have some common sense. In fact, I'm going to go off to a little tangent here. I read the other day, I think it was in the Wall Street Journal, that people that are raised in a rural sector have a better sense of direction than people that are raised in urban sectors. They've done the research and everything. And again, I'm not extolling agrarian life when I say this, but there's something different that you understand me when you're relying on your senses and stuff. And I, to this day, can walk in the woods and tell what's east, west, south. My wife will argue with me that no, we got to go to the right to go south. And I'm like, no, it's to the left. So I've seen it in action. But here's the reason I'm really harping on this a little bit. People in rural America have had to figure things out themselves. They develop this common sense. And then when they see somebody from the city, they may be educated in book sense and everything, that really doesn't have that common sense. And often the urban person will come across as just being a little bit uppity and looking down upon this rural person. It's almost popular sometimes to have a little disdain about the rural stereotype. The reason I'm saying this is so can you kind of see how the uneducated guy or lady living in rural America will look at this urban person who's educated and go, man, stop it. I know some stuff. I can do most anything, but yet you're looking down upon me. That's the divide. And it's I think, what is fueling the division today, even politically. People just want to be respected and heard, no matter what their views are. And again, this is not a poke. I think I told you I ran as a Democrat in southeastern Virginia General Assembly race last a year and a half ago. The Democratic Party didn't pay any attention to me because I was rural. I mean, none. I couldn't even get return phone calls, man. And I'm on the team.
Wow.
Had to pay had to pay them. It was almost a detriment to be a part of the party. And I will have to say, and then you look at the Republican side, and the Republicans were coming out into the rural sectors and paying attention and listening to people. But once they get elected and go back to the General Assembly, they don't pay any attention to us. And so if you can say I'm a guy without a party in a way, but do you understand what I'm trying to say is that there's some issues that need to be resolved in the rural sector, and nobody's really listening. And a lot of these rural people feel like people with education just look down upon them when they've got some important skills. And I believe that as well. The only reason I'm not storming the Capitol or whatever, and again, I'm not saying this to be assertive at all. Whether it's through our training, I know you're an attorney too. I think I had this from a very early age. I think that it was because of the responsibility thrown on me. I was the oldest grandson on both sides, so I caught it. I had to do stuff. And now I've lost my train of thought on it. But you develop this self-reliance and in critical thinking capacity. If somebody tells me something, or I see something on the news, well, you got to prove it to me. I'm going to do my own before I repeat it to someone. I'm going to do my own research. I'm a reluctant listener. I'm not going to believe you, and I don't think that in the rural sector that some people haven't. Let me back up. Across the nation, I don't think we have enough critical thinking skills to understand the difference between truth and fiction, and it's causing a problem. And because of this anger in the rural sectors of not being listened to, I think that holds true too. If you understand me,
So, other than, I guess, what you're saying that if you're growing up in like the more agrarian world, you feel, I guess, like you're the condescension. What are are there other things that people can be mindful of living in the urban world when they are, either just even thinking about rural life or going out? Because one of the things that I think has changed in the last 10 years, at least of what I see in New York, and maybe it's just my peers, as people get older they have more money, but people are and I'm sure this even adds problems to it, as people getting like second homes out in the rural world, which probably just drives up real estate prices, which might not be actually a good thing. But regardless of that, I think at the end of the day, what I would be looking for is just you come face to face with somebody. How do you deal with them? And I think to me, that's what everybody's. To me, I refer to the ideas of curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. Don't act like you know everything. Be curious about what they're doing. Be respectful of the hard work that they're doing, and be understanding of the challenges that they have to confront. But what would you say people need to be doing in engaging the rural sector to help, in the long term, like, change the mood and the interaction?
I Number one thing I'll tell you is that I can tell from your personality and even talking to you, even here virtually today, that you would do fine in the rural sector because you do have a curiosity and you do seem to listen to people and are cautious of how you talk to people. I've told my wife that I want to write a book at some point in time. I'm saying this kind of facetiously about things urban people have told me when they come to my farm. And the title is going to be, Have You Ever Thought About? Undoubtedly, I'm going to say almost 100% of urban people that come to my farm will walk around and say, have you ever thought about doing XYZ? Well, my family's been in Virginia farming for 400 years. It ain't a whole lot that urban person's going to come out there. They want to try to fix things. Don't try to fix it. We've already thought about it. In the rural sector, it's, as I tell people, I can fix most anything issue on my farm with time or money. And seldom do you have either. And so, listen, don't give that farmer advice or don't give that rural person advice. Just listen. And because even some of the poorest people in the rural sector have got some, let me back it up. Some of my mentors in the rural sector were people that were very unlike me. They were economically not on the same strata, but boy, did they have life wisdom. They have value. And I was not going to get that value by going in there and telling them what they need to do. Most urban people will come to the rural sector and try to fix us, stop it. And seriously, that's a big, big issue. You're doing something. And so just listen. Don't try to fix it. I had a gentleman that I knew very well. He's deceased now. He lived in what we would call a shack, with a outhouse, if y'all know what that is, up in New York. Mm-hmm. And he was fairly self-sufficient. He gardened, he loved to fish, and he loved to hunt, and that's how he fed his family. He didn't want to be fixed. People would look at him and say, man, let's help this guy. He's living in this shack, and he was happier than most of us. And I pretty much assure you that if you said, I want to give you $1 million and build you a nice house with an inside bathroom, he'd go, no, thank you. So do you understand my point? Don't. So my biggest message to an urban person coming to the rural sector is don't try to fix things. Try to listen and learn, because no matter who they are, they've got some wisdom. And I have had to tell in my political world, I meet some of the elders and look for them for advice. And I've had them to tell me, well, Mike, I don't have the education you do. And I stop them and go, yeah, you do. That's formal education you get through universities. And then there's life. And this is just kind of a cliche. Man, you got way more life education than I do. And so stop it. No, I value that. And so that's what the rural sector wants to hear, that people value their life experience and their hands-on experience of working the soil and everything. Because man, some of these people know really a lot of stuff. So I'm probably pounding on it too much, but I hear it all the time. Mike, have you ever thought about it? It makes my blood boil. I try to be polite about it, but stop it. So just come and listen to the stories and listen to our funny language and storytelling and so forth and so on, and try to gain knowledge from it, and you'll be very, very, very accepted.
Mm. Well, and I guess there are two things that I guess to build on what you're saying, but more maybe as an explanatory thing, right? So the first is I think sometimes when people are thinking that way, it's their way to learn more. Like sometimes I would say that there might be some people who are doing that, but it's sometimes like they don't even have the framework to know the right questions to ask. So they might start with making some suggestions, but it's really more curiosity. Like they don't really know what to ask. I find that a lot. Like if I was visiting a grits mill, and like you don't have the language, you don't have the understanding, so you just ask something just as a wedge to kind of start a conversation. But the other thing I would say is that I think in the urban setting or in the city and in like the white collar setting especially, you're always looking to improve things, right? I mean, if you think about it, right, like that's everybody's always trying to like we need to get more efficient, we need to make more profit. People looking around their homes, how can I improve this, how can I improve that? And it's something that you kind of get wired into being like, which can be grating. But I think what I would say for rural people to understand is I also, while it comes across as disrespectful, and I think sometimes it certainly does come up from a place of disrespect, I think it also is a cultural thing, because in the city you are always thinking like you could get New Yorkers to talk for 20 minutes about what's the fastest way to get from point A to point B, right? And they'll talk about, take this subway to this subway and then go from this, and make the change here and you take this, and we could talk for a long time about that. So people are always looking to how to get more efficient, and that's the idea of improvement. So again, I think there is certainly a level of maybe disrespect or maybe a little bit of condescension, but it also is people in the urban world do that to each other on with almost everything.
I, I agree with that. And quite frankly, I have to say that in working in the corporate world, I was living in a very agrarian setting in the Midwest, and I really really appreciated having my colleagues in New York, and we'd call up from time to time. And I remember after we just screamed at each other over something on the phone, and they said, "Mike, are you okay?" I said, "Yeah, you're my therapy, man, because I can't talk like this out here, you know."
Uh-huh.
No, I like this, I like
Yeah.
people being direct, but the question was it. But I do agree with you. And here's something else, because it is cultural. Here's something that I learned growing up, and it's a pretty common in the rural sector. If you go to someone else's property or farm, you don't offer advice to them. You ask them, "How do you want me to do this?" And it may be the most idiotic way to do something in the world, and you know a better way, but you keep your mouth shut. And that's culturally how we grew up. Your farm, your kingdom, and you understand what I'm saying. So you just did it, but on the same respects, if they came to your farm and you wanted some help with something, you expected that same respect. So that's culturally where it's a little bit different. You know, it, every family had their traditions and their ways of doing something, and I'm sure there's food cultures even in New York City that understand this one. We still butcher hogs in Surrey County, and there's some people, for God's sakes, when you trim out a ham, man, they don't want Mike Drewry trimming out the ham. They got to do it themselves, because they got that special way they do it. And you
Right.
understand me? So every
Yeah.
family, it's got its own way. Does it really matter? Hell
Yeah.
no.
Right. It's just a form of respect.
Yeah, yeah. So we were growing up on that cultural respect of, you understand me, if you were on somebody else's property, you ask them how to do something. But I do understand it, and quite frankly, I don't take it too bad, but it does. I'm at the, I understand the difference from my cultural corporate world experience and everything. I like different cultures, so I'm a little bit different. But most rural people are not as expansive as what we are talking about or thinking about. They feel insecure because of their lack of education. And we'll tell you a story in the corporate world. I had this guy that was working underneath me from Minnesota, and he was just a pain in the butt. I was going to have to get rid of it. because he just was offensive to people. And I don't know. I don't know that I really came up with this. It may have been a HR consultant or something, but I kind of nailed in on it that he didn't have education. He was working around people that did, and he was a rural guy. And I sat him down and said, Steve, you have knowledge of XYZ that we need, and regardless of, so don't be insecure anymore. Understand that we value that knowledge. Because if you don't get over this, I mean, something bad's going to happen. It turned him around. One conversation. Just me saying, I value what you know. We value what you know. And so you're taking it wrong. And he became a good employee and a kinder, gentler person. The reason I bring that up is just the emphasis that I think a lot of rural people, because of their lack of formal education, are insecure. You understand me? About these conversations, just like what you and I are having. And I couldn't tell you, I was raised in the rural sector, but you could tell me I was a jerk. And I was like, okay, but
Right.
whatever. I'm not going to be too offended, about it. So when I say that, even about just listen, I'm talking more about the people not like me in rural America, if you understand. So
Yeah. Well, but I think, and I guess we're talking about understanding here, and I think that to me the other side of this is, if you are somebody who's more educated, that doesn't mean that you know a lot or know everything. You might know a lot about your specialty, you might know a lot about certain kinds of things, but is to be more like, is genuinely, authentically curious and respectful of the knowledge that somebody else might have in the life that they've lived, even if it's very different and in some respects might be more limited. But like, one of the things that my perception of like farming also is that it's something that really does tie you to the land, right? I mean, if you depend on your livestock or your crops and they depend on you, it's hard to get away. So there can be cultural reasons, but also professionally, it's hard to get away. You don't get to take vacation. You can't farm remotely.
now,
Is that something that also builds into the idea of why people might not be able to get away and get out into the larger world?
yeah, it is difficult. And it's quite frankly the reason you're seeing, you know, the farming population dwindle, because now people do want to get away, but it is very difficult. No, it's difficult. I've got cousins that let me back up. When I was raised in the southeastern Virginia, in the county I lived in, there were so many farm families. I couldn't even put a number on it. 1,000? I don't know. Just they were everywhere. In my county today, people that are relying, family farms that are relying on farming, I probably can count on my 5 fingers.
Wow.
So it's changing, and part of it is what you're talking about. I asked a lady one time. She was I can't think, Sonia Hilgren was her name. She was the first female and probably the only female of, I don't know if you ever heard of it's an old farming magazine called Farm Journal that went back for years. And she became the editor. And I had the privilege of being in a presence one time at my home. And I asked her, I said, what is the biggest change you've seen in agriculture? And I just bring this up because it is telling. I was looking for something kind of deep, and it is kind of deep. She turned to me and said, farm guys marrying city women. I said, okay. Do you understand her point?
It sounds like you're losing the men to the city, or
No, it was more of the city women coming to the farm, and this is not a negative, wanting their kids to be educated, wanting their husbands to stop work at 5 o'clock, wanting to take a trip. And I'm not downing it. And she wasn't either. In other words, basically, it's what you were talking about. In other words, they were bringing ideas of a different lifestyle to the rural sector. And these men love these women, if you understand me. And so it was changing the landscape of rural culture, and it goes to what you're talking about. When my grandfather and grandmother got married at that day and time, and people can, I, I think they loved each other, but can I say it was most of the marriages were more of a business relationship? And when I say business relationship, I'm talking about if you're a farmer and had to physically work all the time. I mean, the lifestyle of the farm at that time, and understand that my parents, when they got married in the 50s, were still picking corn by hand. And now we got these huge machines. Seriously, their first year of farming, they had a mule and cart and going down to the field, and people were throwing corn cobs into the back. We're not that far removed from it. But what I'm getting at is that at that day and time, when my grandfather especially got married in the 1920s, you worked. He would get up at 3:30 in the morning, get the livestock fed and ready for the men that came in at dawn. And you physically worked so hard that you couldn't provide for yourself. And so I don't mean this to be chauvinistic, but marrying a woman that could run the household, provide food for the laborers in the field, handle the financing, they were a huge part of your success. Maybe it still is, I don't know. But so it wasn't very much Romeo and Juliet love passion. It was, hey, this is a good woman that can run a household and run a farm. And do you understand? That's what I mean a business relationship. My grandfather's brother, they had just bought a farm, and this was back in the 30s, and he passed away. My great aunt took the family it was 3 girls and I think 3 boys, and worked that farm and paid it off. You understand the business relationship there? She was very capable of doing it herself. And so that has changed. And I'm not even sure why I went out on this tangent, to tell you the truth. But it was different then, and it's changing. And that's what the Sonia Hilgren meant, is that the desires and everything that rural people want are changing. And part of that change is because of the urban spouse. And it didn't always have to be wives. It was men too, that married into a farm family. It was changing what we want. And we'll have to say that sometimes I've gotten back when I was full-time farming, in my brain, I would say something to the fact of, no, I want my kids to be educated too. I want to take trips from time to time too. And quite frankly, it's probably, while I said it was the peanut economy, I don't know if that hadn't changed what I would be doing. But part of my deal of getting more education was to make sure I could educate my kids and have some luxury, from time to time. So it's changing, and it's certainly. But you're right. You're a stereotypic farm family is not going to leave that farm much.
Yeah, and that's, it's I think one of the. I mean, sometimes if you talk to people in the city, one of the things that they'll fantasize about doing, and I remember like when I was a young lawyer, like people would talk about, wouldn't it be great to own a vineyard? And then once I got into wine, I realized like, no, that's not like what you want to do. It's a hard job. And I think like people like cheese, right? Your average New Yorker can fetishize over cheese. So then I think, oh, it'd be kind of cool to like have a farm and raise sheep and goats and, do that. But that's a hard, unforgiving life that really is not flexible. Those living creatures need you all the time. And I don't know much about this, and I can't say that it's a widespread, but I think sometimes there's like a charming notion of what life would be like in the rural world versus what the reality is.
Well, I will tell you that I think everybody should raise it, at least experience raising their own food one time at least. Because when you do it, you just brought up wine. I've heard a friend that, in fact, I've got 75 gallons of Chardonnay wine in my barn right now fermenting.
Mm.
And the reason why is because I had a friend that, yeah, she's an attorney too, and decided she wanted to own a vineyard. Well, she did, but now she doesn't have time to look after the vineyard. And I said, well, don't throw the juice out. I'm going
Mm.
to come get it. Do I know anything about making wine? No, I'm
Mm.
learning, but that's my curiosity.
Yeah.
I got friends that are commercial winemakers. So it's a curiosity to me. But she made the comment to me when I came up with it. She said, after doing this experience, and she's got a beautiful vineyard. I'm like, retire from lawyer work and run your freaking vineyard.
Mm.
That's where
Mm.
I'd be.
Mm.
She said, I never waste a drop of wine anymore. I drink every drop because I understand how much work it takes to do it. And also, and it's the same thing with farming. I wanted to experience milk cows. And so I've got 2 milk cows on the farm now. Well, I don't throw out very much milk, if you
Mm.
understand me.
Yeah.
I give it away, of course, but you understand.
Yeah.
It does, it changes you. When I drink a glass of milk, I think about the work
Yeah.
it takes to
Well,
put in it. I value that. Now, some people they don't really care, but I value that.
yeah. Well, the other thing that is interesting is like when you think about that pace of life and the pace of change, is that in the rural world you're more captive to nature, right? You can only, the cows are be ready to milk when they're ready to milk. You can't control that too much. When the rain comes or the sun comes, you're more a victim of fate than like in the urban world. In the urban world, like to me, when it snows, it's beautiful to see the city, with the snow, and it's somebody comes and drives and clears the streets, and it's really not and our building has somebody who will, our super will go out and shovel. It's just pretty, and that's it. Things can change really quickly here, and you run around, you hustle to get to your subway, and you go to the office and you work, and you often working too late, and you rush home, and it's a different pace of life. And I think that when we're talking about these things, I do see still like this idea of like it's a cultural difference that we have to be more respectful of, less so than like really a substantive difference. There might be substantive differences, but I think they arise from the different cultures that we live in. And I think it's easy to think about culture just in terms of like ethnicity or nationality, but there's definitely a different culture depending on where you live, and not just in terms of north and south, but just in terms of rural and urban.
Yeah, it's a couple of things, and again, I'm not extolling agrarian living. I but being raised in it, because I can tell you all the bad things about it. Don't be curious, blah blah. It's just on and on and on, and the biases and everything else that comes with living in a more tribal agrarian setting. That's some pretty major negatives. But two things that came across as you were talking about is, and this is the reason, in the corporate world, I've often had some of my corporate friends. So why don't you come back into it? And I'll tell you why. Because on the farm, and you touched on it with nature, I don't have much control over it. You cannot have an ego and stay sane on a farm, because Mother Nature is going to kick you, and it humbles you. In fact, I feel like I know less about farming now than 30, 40 years ago. It just kicks you. And so it keeps me humble, and I need that. And it's hard to farm and grow your own food and not be humble about it. The other thing of it, and this is a very important one for me personally, um, I don't have to go see therapist about whatever. It's therapy. It's meditative. No matter how bad the day is, and being an attorney, which you've been one, you can go through some pretty bad days and deal with some pretty raw people. I go to that farm and around the animals and livestock, and I'm very mindful, and it's very peaceful. It all melts away. And I don't know who I would be if I didn't have that. And so there are two main reasons, to keep me in check, and to make me humble, and it's my therapy. And many people have many things they can do for that, whether it's meditation or whether it's a hobby or whatever. But it keeps me in check, and it provides me a peaceful place to kind of recalibrate. And I almost need it daily. This morning, before coming up here to do legal work, which I'm gonna get to in just a bit, I woke up early at dawn and went out and had a couple of hours with the animals, and you get to know their personalities. Seriously, I don't care where you got a pen of hogs. You got some mischievous ones. You got some that love you. You got some that will bite you. It's like a group of people.
It sounds like you're describing a bunch of children.
Yeah. But you understand.
Yeah.
Well, for me personally, it's very therapeutic,
Yeah.
and it's why I've kept my roots, in it. And it's my heritage. So, but it's what I learned. That's the good side of small town living.
Yeah.
And again. And I understand this, in a small town too, you have to be very respectful of each other. In southern small towns, that means talking behind their back, which is a bad thing. But the reason why is that you can't be abrasive because you're going to see them. They may be. When I was a kid, my grade school teacher was also my Sunday school teacher, and she also I was going to see at the store. So you understand me. You're going to have multiple contacts with people during the week, and you understand. You watched what you said because you didn't want to disrupt it. I don't think that you have to be. You can tell me whether I'm right or wrong. My experience in urban setting, and even when I went to college. You get on an anonymous cab, you can be a little bit more abrasive. And again, I'm not downing it one way or the other, but there's a difference. And that's probably the difference between a rural person is more sensitive, you understand me, to just respect when people come to that place. So,
yeah, I mean, I think that you're, I think it's easier to get, I think that when you're in the city too, you kind of also end up having to tune out a lot of people because there's so many people. Like these examples, like just greeting people. Like you obviously can't say hello to every person that you pass when you're walking from home to the subway or when you're in the subway or going to the office. Like you would never get anywhere. So you end up tuning people out unless you know them. So I think there's a level of you almost have to detach yourself from people. You don't engage everybody, and that's different, and it comes across different when you're meeting people in the rural setting where there's less people, so every person that you meet is somebody you know, and there's more kind of value almost to that experience, because in a rural life you might run into 30 people maybe, but if you're a New Yorker you might run into 1,000 during your day.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm on my farm, and it might make me weird. I don't know, but I mean, there'll be days that the only person I see is my wife.
Right.
Good thing we get along,
Yeah.
But because we've said that all along, good thing we get along because we see each other all the time. And I want to say this to the urban people that listen to this. While I talk about the agrarian lifestyle, I really like people being direct. So, so I value the directness of the urban sector because I get tired of guessing what that rural person means because they talk in riddles, if you understand me. Like, what do they really think?
Yeah.
So I really do value the urban directness. And we could use more of it in the rural sector. It would help with a few. Tell me what's on your mind. Tell me if you don't like me, you don't like me. If you do, you do. Just tell me, man. In the rural sector, that's not how it goes. So. So I just want to do a plug that that's a good thing. So.
That's funny. We could probably have a multi-part series on this topic, and I'd love to continue talking, but we should probably wrap up. And I've really appreciated, covering this, I think, in such depth. But before we finish, can I ask, what gives you hope at the end of the day?
People like you. There's so much division in this world. I'm hoping there are more people like you that are looking for conversations and answers, and I believe they are. And I would just say to people, what gives me hope is I think that most of us are good inside, but man, we need to speak up. We need to have conversations. most of us are middle ground type, moderate people, and so that's what gives me hope. But we really, really need to have conversations like this and speak up. I think silence is a detriment to our society, and when most of us are just good, genuine people speak up, and I'm optimistic about it.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you. And thank you for agreeing to come onto the podcast. It's been great to continue that conversation from the StoryCorps program.
Well, it's been great to meet you and great to be involved in this conversation. As I said, and again, that's what gives me hope is that people like this will sit around and chat about this and talk about the differences and try to understand them. So when you go into a different sector, it doesn't matter where you are, you need to be aware of the cultural differences. And I don't mean that can be ethnic. Hey, that's cultural differences in marriages,
Yeah,
so
for sure.
we weren't raised in the same family. So, but thanks again so much
you.
for it.
And if people are going to be down in your part of the country, you open to the public?
Yes. We've got a little plug, and I don't mean this to be a plug. We're right across the river from Jamestown to Williamsburg. We've got a inn called Palmyra Inn that we let people stay overnight to experience the rural sectors. We will talk to them just like you and I are talking if they want, depending on what they want. We have camping on our farm and visits that people would arrange it ahead of time. It's Drewry Farms, berries.com is our website, but not so much of a plug as it is. I do value opening our farm up so people can come and enjoy it. And if you live in the city, bring your dog and your kids and let them run free and wild a little bit. So it's a part of the joy of owning the property.
All right, great, cool. All right, well, thank you again, and thank you to all the listeners out there. May you go out and explore our country with curiosity, respect, compassion, and humility. All right, take care, Michael. Thank you.
Take care, and thank you too. Bye-bye.